Stand by for broadcast.
You're listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations.
Hello, I'm Squadron Leader Peter Lisney, and in this episode we hear the incredible story of former Chinook crewman Liz McConaughey.
If it's him or me, it's him. So if I get to the point where I know that if I don't pull that trigger, I'm going to either die or the rest of my crew are going to take it around. There was a massive bang and the smell of the aircraft was just pure electrical burning smell. It still stays with me today. I woke up one day and just went, I just need the noise to stop in my head. I want to go to sleep and I want to go to sleep forever, and decided that today was going to be my last day on Earth.
Also, in this episode, we'll reheat a few stories just in case you missed them, and we'll be finding out who is under the hat this week.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
My iPad, because no matter how bad things get, it's always nice to relax and watch a movie at the end of the day.
Find out who is under the hat at the end of this episode. Now, you're about to hear the incredible story of former RAF Chinook crewman Liz McConaughey. From pulling the trigger and being shot at, to extracting wounded soldiers from the battlefield, and even a near-fatal collision with overhead power cables, Liz's 17-year career in the back of a Chinook helicopter is one she wouldn't swap for anything. But not all combat injuries are physical, as Liz shared with Inside Air's Flight Lieutenant Amy Casey. Amy began by asking Liz how her flying career started.
So I didn't actually come from a service background. None of my, fathers or grandfathers or all that sort of stuff were particularly military orientated. But my brother decided he wanted to join the army when he was 17. And I went with him to a place called Palace Barracks, which is back home in Northern Ireland. Some people listening might know it quite well. And when he went in to do his barb test to join the army, I was sat in the waiting area. And there was a magazine on the table with a guy hanging out the side of a helicopter on a piece of rope. And I thought, God, that looks like a cool job. So I asked the chap in uniform, what's this job with this guy on the rope? And he said, well, for starters, it's not a rope. It's a wire.
Yeah.
And the job title is helicopter crewman or loadmaster, because back in the old days, I sound really old, whenever I joined up, that's what it was called. So loadmaster was the entire kind of title for all of our branch. And I was like, do you know what? I want to do that. And I didn't really know that much about it back then. It was just absolutely a different job, something so unique. And I made a few more inquiries with Palace Barracks, did an interview there, got accepted to go across to Cromwell and do all my aptitude tests over there, and got accepted and basically joined up about a month after my A-levels on my 19th birthday. So
wow.
Yeah.
Was that a shock for the family? They obviously expected your brother to go into service, but were they expecting you to come home with this this vision?
I think, at the time they were just really proud I was doing something different. And Northern Ireland in itself, it's a great country now. I go back to see the family once a year, and Belfast itself is a brilliant place now, but back then, it certainly wasn't the heyday of the Troubles. They'd been and gone, but it still was very, the edge of Europe and still quite insular. And it was nice to be able to go and spread my wings. And I think Mum and Dad were really proud of that. Many years later, when we both ended up in a war zone at the same time, I don't think Dad was particularly pleased. It was a bit. I think he had a Saving Private Ryan at one point, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm worried about both my kids getting killed at war." But other than that, they were both really proud at the time.
I was going to say they must be so proud of you guys. And let's talk about your career. 2 deployments to Iraq, and then there were 10 deployments to Afghanistan. Some pretty spicy moments. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the contacts that happened during those 10 deployments?
Yeah, so it started in Iraq, and Iraq was actually quite quiet for us. I know a lot of people listening to this, it wasn't quiet for everyone in Iraq, but certainly from the time I arrived, it was almost like a playground where I could cut my teeth as a crewman without getting shot at too often. We had the odd thing, but never any near misses. But Afghanistan was another step up from that, really. And I always refer to this thing called my normality bar, which is whenever I was in Iraq and we were having the odd intelligence brief about landing sites nearly being hit, it was like a week before they'd been contacted, and I was like, oh God, that's a bit dangerous. And then the next time we get a brief, it had been, mortared 2 days before, and I'd be like, oh God, this is spicy. And then we got to Afghanistan, and it started to ramp up another bit. And, it was like, some of the landing sites we'd go into had been in contact an hour before we were going in. And then it became in its heyday and its most kinetic. You'd be flying in, the landing site is under contact, but you have to go in to get the casualty, and you're never going to say no. I mean, that is our whole reason for living for the Chinook Force. Our whole sole purpose was MERT, really, at the very meat of it, and going to get those soldiers out of the battlefield was absolutely what we lived and died for. So we were always going to go, but you find yourself flying in and out of places in a hail of bullets quite regularly, really. There's unlike many people, there's one contact in your life. I had so many that we went in and out of landing sites that were just either under fire or we were being contacted as we lifted. But that became so normal.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you get used to that?
And that's the thing, is that this normality bar in my brain kept creeping up and up and up to the point where you'd be sitting on a landing site taking incoming fire, and you didn't feel fear, you didn't feel in danger in any way, and because you were in what felt really comfortable environment. And it's worrying that by that point, that's how we felt comfortable. But our job was to man the weapons, very much so you're not going to start hiding behind the weapon, because it's there to defend the aircraft and there to defend your crew and your mates ultimately. So you don't have the option of going, oh God, we're taking incoming, I'm on the deck. It's not like that. You can't take cover, you've got to stand there and you stand your ground and return fire. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Well, I mean, let's touch on that for a minute. When you talk about defending your crew by returning fire, some of the weaponry that you had access to, and that's a huge responsibility. Was that sort of by design or by the heat of the battle? How did that side of things unfold?
Yeah, so whenever we were in Iraq, we had a weapon called the M60 fitted, which is, we had that at the door, at the front and on the ramp. And the threat was kind of assessed as that was the only sort of self-defence we needed on the aircraft. But when we got to Afghanistan, we had the M134 fitted, which is a huge gun. It's about 57 kgs in weight, and it's called the minigun, which always used to make me laugh because there is nothing mini about that gun. And it's got a fire rate of 3,000 rounds a minute. Whoa. So, it just lights up the sky like a lightsaber and destroys pretty much anything that it hits. My sort of internal rules of engagement were always, if it's him or me, it's him. So if I get to the point where I know that if I don't pull that trigger, I'm going to either die or the rest of my crew are going to take a round, then that's when I felt the moment was right to pull the trigger. And certainly with the amount of, MERT that I've witnessed and the loss that I've seen, I think you have to really witness that loss to kind of respect the finality of death. And you can't take those moments back. Once you pull the trigger and once you killed someone, that's it. So I was always very, I think, measured. I wouldn't say careful is the wrong word, because you just have to be measured when you pull that trigger. If you hesitate in your decision, that's the wrong thing to do as well. So you just have to be clarity of thought, I think, which is somewhat difficult when you're under pressure.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's, you can only sit here and nod along and imagine, after 10 deployments, like you say, you've seen some pretty spicy things. I want to ask you about the near fatal wire strike.
Yeah, so ironically, I think the nearest I came to death in Afghanistan was this wire strike. I've had 2 near misses with bullets. I've got 2 bullets in my bedside drawer, ironically. I might make a pair of earrings out of them or something. But, I still think the nearest I ever actually came to dying was this wire strike. And we were dropping off an underswing load at Kajaki Dam, which is about 45 minutes north of Bastion, up the Helmand Valley. And it's a beautiful place. It's probably one of the most beautiful places on the planet that I've ever flown over. And we dropped off an underswing load and then climbed out of the landing point and flew straight into a set of 250-foot high tension wires. So the same as you'd see in the UK here if you're driving along, the huge voltage ones. And as helicopter crews, we always refer to ours as helicopter killers. And in the UK, we do lots of recce's to look for them before we fly at night time so we can check where they are. And most of the time we know where they are. Afghanistan was slightly different and they weren't always updated on the maps. So, we always keep a good lookout. That's one of the things we always look for. But we hadn't seen these ones through just a catalogue of being busy, us being heads in doing the underswing load. And we flew into them. So the first thing I remember was the smell. There was a massive bang and the smell of the aircraft was just pure electrical burning smell. It still stays with me today. But the wires sparked out into the 3 o'clock and the whole aircraft lurched. My crewmate Logie, he nearly went through the centre hatch and was saved by his harness that we have to wear that attaches us to the airframe. Yeah. So I sort of looked over my shoulder to check he was okay. And then the whole aircraft started to wallow towards the ground. And I I held the front of my harness because I very much thought we were going to go into the ground and roll over, and I was going to have to escape the aircraft. But at about 10, 15 feet off the ground, the co-pilot managed to pull in power because the cockpit had actually caved in and all the glass had come in over the pilot's eyes and he couldn't see. So hence why the co-pilot had to take control. So we managed to limp back into the air, and luckily we had another Chinook with us. We always used to fly in pairs back in those days before the Apaches were there. So he kind of chaperoned us back to Bastion, and the whole way back, it was probably the longest 45-minute flight of my entire life because I thought we were going to have to land on at any point and go on the run. So I had my go bag beside me. We always carry a go bag, which here in the UK is usually full of some dancing rig for a night out in a night out somewhere. But in Afghanistan, it's pretty much just bullets and water. So I moved that sort of right beside my crew station, and we made it back to Bastion. But yeah, pretty dicey affair all up, and very lucky to be alive at the end of it.
Unbelievable. In your book, you talk about your biggest honour, serving on Mert. It must have been incredibly tough to be in that situation and to remember it as an honour and relive those moments of life and death. Why is that important to you?
I think, the whole Chinook force, our kind of purpose, not just the Mert thing, but, even before Afghanistan sprung up, was, we just support the troops on the ground. And we always used to call it the lowest common denominator. The guy who's got the least vote, our job is to go and support them, pull them out of the ditch, get them back to camp. I'm sure there's probably plenty of people here who've had to get on a bus instead of a Chinook when we've broken, and I haven't managed to achieve that. But, 9 times out of 10, that's absolutely what we try to do. And Mert was just a step up from that, really. The guys out on the ground up at the Helmand Valley, I know from speaking to a lot of veterans since that they felt more confident going out the front gate of a lot of the FOBs, knowing that the Mert was there coming to get them. So it was the greatest honour, and whenever we would go and collect a soldier who had essentially paid the ultimate price, being part of their last journey off the battlefield is a huge honour. They have died for their Queen and country, and to be able to bring them back to Bastion was a huge honour, and subsequently stand at the ramp ceremony as they got loaded onto the Herc to come back here to the UK. But even seeing on my time on Mert, I saw casualties come over the ramp who were already dead and got brought back to life on my feet by the amazing medics that we had on the Mert. And I've also seen, some soldiers come over and take their last breath on the ramp. So, it was a whole spectrum of emotions on that duty. But it certainly makes you kind of realise, like I mentioned earlier, the finality of death. And what, I don't think you can really learn what love is until you see what loss is. And we certainly saw a lot of loss.
Very few Chinook crew members, if any, have spanned the length of time that you deployed to Afghanistan. How did you come back, Liz? How did you find your way back home physically and mentally?
So each of the deployments, certainly in the early days of Herrick, we would just come straight back to the UK. So you jump off the aircraft and you come straight back, and we had no decompression or anything like that. I remember one particular time I just bought a new apartment, and I literally came off the back of a Mert shout, actually, and the boss said, "Pack your bags as you're going home." And my instant thought was, what have I done wrong? But actually, with the choice of getting, or the chance of getting a few people out early by one day, and he said, I'm sending you back on early so you can get your house sorted. And I remember arriving back in my apartment less than 24 hours later and being stood there and just sobbing, because it was so out of the ordinary. It wasn't what I expected to be on that particular day, and it really threw me. But as the years went on in Herrick and it became more and more kinetic, I think the forces as a whole realised the effect it was having on people, and we started to do decompression at Cyprus, which was 2 days. So there was a lot of different thoughts on Cyprus. Some people just want to get straight back home again. But having had that moment before for myself, I knew that actually, as painful as it was sitting for 2 days on a beach talking to the Pardren, drinking 2 tins of warm beer or Strongbow, it was useful, and it did have its purpose. But by the end of it, I say I finished my time in the Air Force, and then I thought I was fine for a very long time. And I remember thinking, God, how have I managed to get away with all that time at war, seeing all that trauma, and actually being pretty held together and pretty intact? And it wasn't until 2020 where it really started to catch up with me.
Was it brought on by the effects of coronavirus and being at home on your own, lockdown, all that sort of stuff? Did that influence
I absolutely think it did. I came out of the Air Force in 2019, and 2019 as a year was full of sort of new adventures, new jobs, trying to find your feet as a civvy, and kind of, that freedom of where I'm not deploying anywhere. So I was partying, I was going to loads of events, going to Ascot and all these great things with my girlfriends, and life was pretty good. And then 2020, we got locked down and I lived on my own in my apartment. And I think where all my coping mechanisms up until that point for the trauma that I'd seen and the things that I'd done in Afghanistan, my coping mechanism, as many people's was going to the gym. Letting it all out, empty the bucket at the end of the day. And also, just going down the pub, chatting with your mates and having a drink and kind of, crossing, chatting about war stories and just crossing dits and stuff. And that was all gone. So suddenly I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't really go for long runs like I used to and just empty the bucket, because I think in the original lockdown we were like 20 minutes you were allowed out or something. And I had no friend, I had nobody I can go and sit and chat to. So suddenly it was just me, the four walls and all of my thoughts. And as the year went on, I started to become really unravelled. I kind of knew it was happening. The biggest combat indicator, as we like to say, was I got insomnia. And I remember being awake one night and going through my logbook to find out some of the guys I picked up in the merch outs, and then looking them up on the internet to kind of cross back their story. And the one thing we'd always done on MERT, or certainly I had as a coping mechanism, was it was just a really important package. It was the most important package in the world. You just have to move it from A to B. Don't personalise it and don't find out who's in the body bag. And I started to do that, and then realised, were they married? Did they have kids? Were they engaged? All those kind of things. And that really started to kind of crumble me inside. And in August, I woke up one day and just went, I just need the noise to stop in my head. I want to go to sleep, and I want to go to sleep forever, and decided that today was going to be my last day on earth. And spent the day with absolute precision planning how to end my life. And I look back now, and the whole day was so emotionally detached. It was like a robot. I was almost watching my life through a lens. I had no emotion at that point. I'd completely blocked out emotion. And it was just another task that I had to do. So at midnight that night, I ended up taking an overdose. And I don't remember much else after that. Obviously, the fact I'm sat here chatting to you today, I survived. And it turned out that actually about 10 to 1 in the morning, I had phoned the Samaritans for 13 seconds, which I don't remember. And then I'd been on the phone to 911 for 10 minutes. And I don't know why I called 911 and not 999. I must have been watching too much Netflix during lockdown. But yeah, an ambulance crew had found me. And I was very lucky. I actually lived next to the hospital at the time. And they said, I spoke to them a few weeks later and thanked them for what they did for me. And if I hadn't lived next to the hospital, I probably wouldn't have survived. So I'm a very lucky girl. But the one thing that it did prove, that somewhere inside me there was still a will to live, the fact that I made that phone call.
Goodness me, mate. Thank you again for sharing that with us. It's an incredible story. And I know that you say in your book you want to help people with their struggles as well, PTSD, mental unwellness, whatever it may be. What do you hope that people who are listening to us today will take away from our chat?
Well, I think something that I did an interview recently, and someone said, there's a theme in your book, Liz, you're so resilient. And I said, well, I'm not resilient because I broke, I broke absolutely spectacularly. And then they said, well, that's not really what resilience is. So it suddenly occurred to me that my entire career, I used to get my annual report and I wore the word resilience like a badge of honour. God, she's so resilient. And I used to have this misconception that resilience was unbreakable. I'm not I can't break. She's so good, she never breaks. And certainly throughout my, time on Herrick, I never wanted to ditch a debt so that somebody else had to go in my place. So no matter what, I would still go. I was resilient. And actually that's not what resilient is. It's the ability to bounce back. So I think my message really for people is that, if I had have let the barrier down a bit and said, I'm actually not okay. I'm really not okay. And just to talk, there's so many people who during that time, I think if I'd have been with friends and they'd seen me, they would have started to see the behaviour shift. Anyone from the forces knows their mates better than anyone because we're like family, aren't we? So the gym bunny that stops going to the gym, the person who's always down the pub who stops going to the pub, or vice versa, we pick up those behaviour changes really quickly. And that's when you can start to notice that someone's probably going downhill. But nobody picked that up for me because I was on my own. my friend kept phoning to see how I was. I'm like, just back in from a run. And actually I was still in my pyjamas, barely able to get out of bed. So, you know, watch for those behaviours with someone. But if you do suspect someone's really starting to, struggle, ask twice, because so many people ask me, are you okay? And I said, yeah, living the dream, as is always a favourite with us. And actually, sometimes if someone asks you a second time, it's enough to crack the eggshell and you go, actually, I'm really not okay. So I've started, after, you know, going through my PTSD counselling, giving my mental health a number now. So it's much easier, I think, for people when they ask you, how are you? Just to go, you know what, I'm about a 5 today, maybe a 6. And then you can try and work out how you can get to a 10. Or at least it's an indicator to someone to know that you're not so great. You don't have to say why, and they don't even have to try and help you, but at least it's something that people can then acknowledge, that if you've been on a constant trend of 3s for a while, that there's probably something wrong. And even for yourself to be able to see that, you know, it's quite important. So yeah, give your mental health a number, and if you've got mates, ask them twice how they are. It's really important.
That's a great shout, and that's some great advice as well. You must have seen a huge amount of change in the armed forces, not just the RAF, throughout your service. Equality, inclusion, is it getting better for women?
I do think it is, yeah. Going back to when I joined, and there was 3 of us in my basic training, but by the time I got to Odium, I was the only crew girl for a while. Certainly not the first, there had been some before me, but they'd left, and yeah, it was just me for a while. But in its heyday at Odium, we had 5 females on the squadron, and I don't know whose genius idea that was, to put all 5 females on the same squadron. And most of us were blonde, and there was two called Beck, so it was confusing at best. But I do remember one flight safety day where we had a brief on the squadron, and I went up to the coffee break at 10 o'clock, and there was a queue for the toilets, and it was the first time that had ever happened in my entire RAF career. So it is getting better. And I think, yeah, the forces in a whole is absolutely heading the right way. You know, most women now in the forces don't want any special recognition for what they do. And I think that's the theme certainly that hopefully comes across in my book, is that I never wanted a big medal saying, isn't she good because she's a girl and she can do this? Because even by saying that, it's almost insinuating that you couldn't do it in the first place. So it's that sort of almost negative, you know, discrimination. So the forces is definitely changing, and the best people to shout about it are the females that are in it, who are just getting on with the job and almost just getting their heads down and doing the best of their ability.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the book, Liz, The Chinook Crew Chick. What's next for you?
So, well, the book was, I say, I never really meant it to be published. I wrote it while I was having my PTSD counselling, and it took me 3 weeks, and it just kind of bled out onto the paper. Everything just came out, had to go on paper, and then sent off to some publishers, and ultimately a year later it's on the shelves for people to buy, which has been crazy. But the reception I've got from that has been overwhelming in terms of mental health, like we were speaking about, just almost encouraging people to talk more. A lot of people said that they've actually read the book and it's kind of made them open their eyes to their struggles, and they've been burying their head in the sand, and now they're going to ask for help, which is just immense that, you know, that's kind of opening those corridors or those doors for people. But I want to kind of continue that theme. So yeah, I would love to get into that as a job, you know, do something with a forces charity, or do something with a veterans sort of foundation, do something where it's making a difference again, because ultimately my entire career on the Chinook was about having purpose and making a difference. So if I can continue to do that, then that would be absolutely brilliant. And I've got a few sequels to the book in mind, so watch this space for those. But I've got a few more lined up, and I'd love to write a kids book as well. I'd love to do a kids book about some of the aircraft in the Air Force. So yeah, I just need to find someone who can draw, though. I'm not very good at drawing.
I can't help you, mate. Stick figures is where I hang up my hat. But look, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. To wrap it up, for people listening to this that are just starting their military career, from your time of service, from everything that you've seen, what would be the best advice you can offer?
Well, I'll start with that by saying that even if I had the choice to win the lottery or live forever, or a rewind button, I'd have the rewind button and I'd go back to the start and do it all again. It really was the absolute best career that I could ever have wished for. And, you know, I don't have any regrets in life, but I do wish I'd taken more pictures and catalogued it more. I think in my day, you know, we didn't have these digital phones. You could take loads of pictures. So I've very little in terms of logging my early days in the forces. And I never kept a journal, which would have helped massively for the book. But yeah, just like savor every moment, and, you know, take every opportunity you get, because, you know, there's a lot of time when you're in the forces, you get offered a lot of opportunities and you just won't get them in Civvy Street. You won't get time off to go and do all those, you know, leadership courses all the, adventure training, all that sort of stuff. So savour it, because the Forces is such a good place that really harnesses that and really nurtures it, and it gives you those opportunities. So yeah, just jump in everything that comes your way and enjoy it.
It's just been a real pleasure to speak to you today, Liz. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
If you or someone you know is affected by the issues discussed in this episode, help is available for you. Search the RAF website for the Health and Wellbeing page for information about support services. In the UK, you can also call Samaritans on 116 123 or visit nhs.uk and search for mental health. You can speak with your GP or call NHS 111. If someone's life is at risk, for example, they have seriously injured themselves or taken an overdose, or if you don't feel you can keep yourself or someone else safe, call 999. A mental health emergency should be taken as seriously as a physical one. You won't be wasting anyone's time.
I'm AS1 Victoria Andrews with Reheat for Inside Air. A Royal Air Force C-17 Globemaster has transported vital humanitarian aid to Egypt for delivery to civilians in Gaza. The heavy lift transport aircraft delivered 21 tonnes of life-saving aid from the UK, including wound care packs, water filters and solar lights, which will be distributed by the Egyptian Red Crescent. This delivery comes only 2 days after the UK government's announcement to provide support to the humanitarian crisis. The first of 16 Protector aircraft, the RAF's new remotely piloted air system, has arrived at RAF Waddington in Lincolnshire. Protector, equipped with a suite of surveillance equipment, brings a critical global surveillance capability for the RAF, operating at heights of up to 40,000 feet with an endurance of over 30 hours. The platform now enters a testing phase, which will involve ground testing of the satellite links and taxi procedures, as well as takeoff and landing procedures. Meanwhile, a ceremony has been held for the reformation of 31 Squadron, who will be equipped with Protector. The squadron, known as the Gold Stars, was disbanded in 2019 following the retirement of the Tornado GR4. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission has hosted Royal Air Force personnel and other guests to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Air Force's memorial at Runnymede. The memorial was unveiled in October 1953 by Her late Majesty the Queen, one of her first ceremonial duties following her coronation. The memorial records the names of more than 20,000 men and women of the Commonwealth Air Forces from the Second World War who have no known grave. And energy, determination, leadership and professionalism were recognised at the 2023 RAF Sports Awards, where sportsmen and sportswomen celebrated another year of extraordinary success. The ceremony recognised 22 nominees in 8 categories from 15 different sporting disciplines, including 3 Lifetime Achievement Awards. Visit the news section of the RAF website to see this year's winners. That's Reheat on Inside Air.
I'm AS1 Ben Russell, and this is Under the Hat, where we get to know an aviator in less than a minute. Name you're known by.
Flemmo.
What's your profession?
I'm a logistics chef currently deployed on 3 Mobile Catering Squadron.
What's the best thing about your job?
The opportunity to deploy anywhere in the world.
Hardest part of your job?
The hardest part for me would be being away from my friends and family.
Best location you've served?
Australia. Deployed on exercise Talisman Sabre, working alongside our Australian and American counterparts.
What bit of luxury kit do you never deploy without?
My iPad, because no matter how bad things get, it's always nice to relax and watch a movie at the end of the day.
And what's your proudest moment in the RAF?
My graduation at RAF Halton, marching past my friends and family in my number 1 uniform, smart as a button.
Thanks AS1 Lee Fleming for helping us rustle up another delicious serving of Under the Hat.
That's all for this episode of Inside Air. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favourite podcast app, and join us again soon.
You've been listening to Inside Air, a behind-the-wire view of the Royal Air Force, its people, technology and operations. If you're serving in the RAF and have a story for us, please speak to your unit media and communications officer. Inside Air is written and produced for the Royal Air Force by RAF Media Reserves.